So I keep hearing people talk about how the Democrats have no platform, about how it's just all about the orange man bad, and that's the only thing they're running on is hatred for Trump. And while I can certainly agree to that to some extent, I mean, heck, I probably said it myself at some point. I did want to point out that the Democrats do have a platform, and I mean, they do have an agenda. It's probably not one they have wrote down on a list somewhere or perfectly laid out on a website. Probably because no one would actually want it. Well, I mean, the far-left nut jobs most likely do want it, but not any sane or rational American would want it because their platform is actually anti-American. It's all about changing America to be, well, not America anymore. I mean, all you have to do is look at what they've been saying the past several years. I mean, they're not shy about it. So I kind of wanted to lay out what that looks like. So let's look at the first one. Democrats have been saying over and over they want to take away guns. Whether it's in the form of gun control, gun buybacks, or straight gun bans. Whatever wording they want to use, they want to take away guns. And eventually they want to get rid of the Second Amendment.
Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47.
I mean, sure, right now it's all about taking away those scary assault rifles or assault weapons. I mean, both of those terms are rather ambiguous, but particularly in the way Democrats use them. But when Biden, the freaking Dem nominee for president, tweets out wanting to ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, what other conclusion can you come to? So, of course, this is part of their agenda. Democrats have been saying it in debates, in interviews, and article after article has been written about doing it. And does anyone really think if they got their gun ban on assault weapons, they'd stop? I mean, of course not. They've been saying for years they want that guns kill people. The whole less guns out there, the less people die. As if the guns just went away, people would stop dying. I mean, they never seem to talk about how often people use guns to defend themselves. Of course, now we're getting to the point where even when people do defend themselves using a gun, that's considered a bad thing. So I don't think anyone with even the most minuscule amount of good faith could argue against this being a part of the Democrat agenda. I mean, the only time a Democrat likes a gun is when their own bodyguards are using it against the American people. I mean, even Beto basically said if you don't want to give up your gun, then the law enforcement would be sent to your house to recover it.
We're a country of laws.
Okay, but let's just assume that there's a rancher in Texas that doesn't, that says, I'm not going to do this because this is an unjust law and it's unconstitutional. What's the next step? I think that's what we need to concede because there will be people that don't turn their guns back in. What's the next step for the federal government there?
Yeah, I think just as in any law that is not followed or flagrantly abused, there have to be consequences, or else there is no respect for the law. So, in that case, I think there would be a visit by law enforcement to recover that firearm and to make sure that it is purchased, bought back, so that it cannot be potentially used against somebody else.
Sending people with guns to take away your guns. I mean, that's the Democrat platform.
To gun owners out there who say, well, a Biden administration means they're going to come for my guns.
Bingo. You're right if you have an assault weapon. The fact of the matter is they should be illegal, period.
Next up is the Green New Deal. What exactly does that mean? Well, at this point, it could mean anything. The assumption is that it's about fighting climate change. Because according to AOC and the left, climate change is a direct threat to the national security of the United States. A lot of Democrats, whether they really believe it or not, are saying climate change is the greatest threat we face.
Our existential threat is climate change. We have to confront it before it's too late.
Climate change.
Yeah.
Nuclear proliferation and climate change.
Say China and climate change.
The reality is this about giving the government more control of whatever they want to shove into the quote-unquote deal. I mean, AOC's original proposal had everything from getting rid of airplanes and farting cows to economic security for those unable or unwilling to work. It has renewable energy and clean energy written all over it, and to do that requires restructuring all of the United States to bring about their utopia. Well, I mean, how else are they going to do that without giving the government massive amounts of power? And why do they want the government to have that much power? I mean, because like so much of the Democrat agenda, power is the real goal. I mean, AOC's chief of staff basically admitted that the Green New Deal isn't about fighting climate change, but more about controlling the economy and implementing socialism. As socialism is where the Democrats have been trending for several years, possibly even more. I mean, and as more of the radical far left infects the party, that's where it's going. So, I mean, despite all of this, despite what the Green New Deal really represents, Democrat after Democrat have shouted their support for it.
And so I support all the framework that the Green New Deal supports.
I am supporting the Green New Deal.
I support the Green New Deal.
We both agree that we have a new Green Deal to deal with the existential threat that faces humanity.
Regardless of what it might actually be, it's just basically a slogan now, like Black Lives Matter. I mean, Green New Deal. Doesn't matter what it actually means. So, I mean, the Green New Deal might as well just read, give us control of everything and we'll fix your life. Which might as well just be the Democrat platform. Next, we have the border and the wall. Now, granted, this hasn't been much of an issue lately, but rest assured, Democrats haven't forgotten about it. I mean, they talked about it plenty during the debates last year, so it's definitely still part of their agenda. I mean, I honestly wouldn't put it past them to try to tear down Trump's border wall if they ever gained the power to do so. I mean, Beto straight up said he would do it if he became the president.
You know, would you take the wall down now, here?
Yes.
Like you have a wall.
Absolutely.
Knock it down.
I'd take the wall down.
And do you think the city, if there's a referendum here in this city, that would pass?
I do.
But we all know how they feel about the wall. How it's a waste of money, it's ineffective, and of course, you know, it's racist.
Cannot hold public employees hostage because he wants to have a wall that is not effective in terms of its purpose. The fact is, a wall is an immorality. It's not who we are as a nation.
So, I mean, there's no telling what they'll do regarding the wall, but no doubt they'll do something. As for the border itself, well, they want to decriminalize border crossings. I mean, they've said it and they mean it.
Last night on the topic of decriminalization of the border. If you'd be so kind, raise your hand if you think it should be a civil offense rather than a crime to cross a border without documentation. Can we keep the hands up so we could see them?
And let's remember, that's not just a...
You're one of the few candidates that has stated that you would like to decriminalize border crossing. If you become president, will you implement this policy?
Yes.
So clearly they want people to come into the country unchecked. They've even campaigned on abolishing ICE.
In Congress, I'll work to close ICE down.
I think ICE should be abolished.
We must abolish ICE.
I mean, despite all the grandstanding they may do on wanting to help the poor immigrant families, the reason they want illegals flooding the country is pretty obvious when you just think about it. I mean, aside from a few other minor reasons, the main reason hinges on the next part of the Democrat platform, that being amnesty. So, amnesty is a part of the Democrat platform. It's just a matter of what shape it'll take, because it's more than just giving all illegal immigrants in the country citizenship. I mean, that's not going to fly with a lot of Americans. So, Democrats are getting creative in the ways they go about doing it. I mean, like giving illegals access to things only citizens should have access to. I mean, whether it's giving them driver's license, financial assistance for colleges, stimulus money, or even just voting rights in some local elections. I mean, Democrats even want to give them access to health care.
Raise your hand if your government plan would provide coverage for undocumented immigrants.
I mean, if you're getting all that, well, I mean, what's the difference between being a citizen and not being one? then if they're not going to actually deport these people, I mean, you've effectively made them citizens without actually passing amnesty. I mean, Democrats argue that they should be given these things simply because they live in the country. I mean, it doesn't matter if they came here illegally through borders they want unsecured and decriminalized to cross. It's as if Democrats want to get rid of the concept of citizenship altogether, that just by physically living in the country, you should have access to everything. And to get here, you just have to walk across the border or, swim here or whatever. And why do they want this? I mean, do we really believe it's because they want to help all these people? That they're just this generous? I mean, when practically every study and real-world example shows that these types of things are bad for a country. Well, they believe if these people get the vote in state and federal elections, especially federal, they'll vote Democrat. I mean, that's what they think. And if that's what they want, if they want illegals allowed to vote in state and federal elections, I mean, if everything they believe holds true, then this would be a massive win for them in state elections and federal. I mean, except for one area. I mean, and that's the presidency, which is still elected through the Electoral College. Which is why the next agenda on the Democrat platform is, you guessed it, abolishing the Electoral College.
As a presidential candidate, what are your thoughts on the Electoral College?
I want to get rid of it. So here's my goal. My goal is to get elected and then to be the last American president elected by the Electoral College. I want the second term to be that I got elected by direct vote. I'm ready. Popular vote. I just think this is how a democracy should work. Call me old-fashioned, but I think the person who gets the most votes should win.
Stuff like this just shows how deceptive these people are. I mean, the United States has never been a direct democracy. It's always been a republic since its founding. I mean, which is a type of democracy, sure, but it isn't just straight mob rule. I mean, they know this, but this isn't about correcting something that's wrong. I mean, it's about changing the country to better suit their needs when it comes to the elections. I mean, again, they think if they can get rid of the Electoral College, then they're basically guaranteed the presidency just by having the large Democrat cities alone. I mean, but then on top of that, if they can get their amnesty for illegals, then it's a lock for sure in their book. Yet, even still, without having abolished the Electoral College, Democrats are already trying to circumvent it with their National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. I mean, I'll let you look that one up. But, I mean, it's the same thing. They're just trying to get the presidency designed by popular vote. Because they've convinced themselves that because Trump lost the popular vote, but only won because of the Electoral College, then the popular vote's the way to go. I mean, it's their path to victory. But even if they are able to get rid of the Electoral College, they're just as willing to corrupt it by using illegal immigrants as pawns. I mean, they want illegals counted in the 2020 census. I mean, when Democrat cities and Democrat states all boldly claim to be sanctuary cities sanctuaries for illegals, then by counting illegals in the census, that just means more electoral votes for those states. Thus, by extension, a greater chance of winning elections. I mean, Democrats basically want one-party rule, and they don't want anyone getting close to challenging them. I mean, they want every conceivable advantage when it comes to the elections. I mean, so they're willing to change the entire election system and the country as a whole to suit them. I mean, seriously, if it ever got that bad, I wouldn't put it past Democrats to say, well, why even have elections anymore? We always win. And speaking of trying to change the country to suit them politically, I mean, that brings us to our next Democrat platform agenda. Statehood for D.C. and Puerto Rico. Now, this one is straightforward. I'm not even going to spend that long on it. It's just another means by which Democrats can change the country to benefit them politically. If you make D.C. and Puerto Rico a state, that means 4 new senators, 2 for each state. They believe these new states will heavily vote Democrat. Thus, with 4 new Democrat senators, in their minds that basically guarantees that they'll control the Senate. It's that simple. I mean, sure, they'll probably get some more House representatives, but I think this is all about trying to take the Senate. All right, so this last pick for the Democrat platform is something they were talking about last year, but it never really seemed like it was an issue that they were serious about pushing, and that is packing the Supreme Court. I mean, I wasn't even going to put it on the list until what just happened recently, that being the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So with her death, this issue has just basically jumped back in the forefront. I mean, with Democrats basically threatening President Trump that they'll do it if him and the Republicans appoint a new justice before the election. But I mean, let's be serious. Regardless of whether the Republicans appoint a new justice, I mean, the Democrats could definitely do this if they regain the power to do so. I mean, just simply based on the fact that with how close Republicans have gotten to tipping the court in their favor under Trump. I mean, they would pack the court to make sure it will always be on their side, as the courts have always been used as a means to either obstruct Republicans or continue to push their own agenda whenever they're out of power. I mean, we've seen this demonstrated over and over again throughout Trump's presidency. So I believe it's a possibility now, regardless of what Trump does. I mean, especially when you consider that one of the other Democrat judges is over 80 years old, and the court has been really instrumental in pushing for the Democrat agenda, by either handing out rulings that should have been by all rights laws passed by Congress, with the recent reinterpreting of sex to include sexual preferences and gender expressions is, just an example. Even though when the law was written, it clearly didn't have those things in mind. So the Supreme Court has definitely been a means by which Democrats have gotten around Congress, and you better believe they want to keep it that way. So that's it. That's my list for what is really the Democrat platform. Now, you might ask, where's all the free stuff? Like free healthcare and free college and free housing and this and that. Well, honestly, they could probably shove a lot of that into the Green New Deal. I mean, if they really wanted to. But to be honest, I mean, how serious are they about really doing these things? I mean, these are issues that Democrat voters, or, at least some of them, say they want. I mean, that's why they're considered a campaign issue for the Democrats to run on. I mean, if Democrats do it, then that makes it harder to run on them in the future. Not impossible, mind you. I mean, look at Obamacare. I mean, they championed that like it was going to fix everything. But they still run on healthcare being an issue. So, anything's possible. But the big difference between the free stuff and the things I've listed is that those things are things that further give Democrats power and control over the government and our lives. And I think those are things Democrats are far more interested in than actually trying to help people and solve problems. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like the video, please like and subscribe. You can find more of my opinions over on my Minds page. You can also find me on Parler and Twitter. Links for everything will be in the description, of course. Thanks again, and God bless.